very much for that introduction. And it's lovely to be here this morning to talk to you about my big passion, which is sea, and particularly the seas around the Isle of Man. Can I just say, I know I've got quite a quiet voice, so Richard, if you can't hear me, let me know. I don't want to be talking too quietly. So today, I'm going to be talking about research that I've been doing as a result of the Corlett Bolton Research Award, which it was a collaboration between Corlett Bolton and UCM to fund a research project that would benefit the community. So Corlett Bolton very kindly funded this research, and Sally Bolton's here today, who's spearheaded this. So, and it enabled me to do a piece of research which I hope will be beneficial in terms of informing how the future of Manx seas, but it was looking at the past of our marine area, which is something I've always been very interested in. So I initially looked at a few key focus habitats and species, but it has become much wider as I found more and more sources of information. So I could literally talk about this all day, so I'm just trying to pick out a few of the real key areas to give you just a taste of some of the things that I've been discovering. So the discipline of marine historical ecology has become more and more important in the past 10 years or so. And part of this is because of the phenomenon of shifting baselines. So not only with the public, but with scientists seeing the marine environment as they know it, and not understanding it in the context of what has happened in the decades or the centuries before, and therefore not being as concerned or informed as they should be in terms of what we need to do to recover the ecosystem. So that this illustration by Cameron Shepherd is just a really good infographic, just showing, 200 years ago, the seas were very rich and full of marine life before people began to exploit them intensively. In the 1950s, they were much depleted, but there was still, a lot of diversity. And then in our time, somebody who never put their head under water before might find our marine environment very fascinating and diverse and amazing, but it's a shadow of its former self. So it's really important to understand the history of the marine environment so we can make sure we look after it properly for the future. So the sources of information that I mined for this study were very diverse, and I think this is one of the things to emphasise, that as scientists, my background is as a marine scientist, the focus is very much on the academic literature, but to really find out what happened in our seas over the last few hundred years, you have to use a whole diverse range of sources. So all the historical accounts, newspaper articles, maps, old photographs, angling publications, archaeological reports, and all sorts of different collections of things as well, so a really diverse mix of things. Ruth Thurston, who's a leading marine historical ecologist and who studied at the Port Eyre Marine Laboratory, has written a lot about the history of the seas of British Isles, and also about the approaches to marine ecological history. And this infographic from one of her papers just shows some of the diversity of sources for doing research about the history of the marine environment. So not just data and photographs, but menus showing what people were eating and what the trends were, which then led sometimes very intensive fishing activities, but also going much further back, art and songs and traditional knowledge. So it's the wider you can look, the better the picture you get of what was happening in the sea. So, as I said, this has unearthed all sorts of interesting information about all our, so many different aspects of our marine environment. But I'm just going to flag up some of the really key findings, and I'll go into a bit more detail to give you a snapshot of a couple of the key findings. So first of all, not surprisingly, the seabed was more complex. There were more reefs, and particularly biogenic reefs, which are the reefs that are built by animals mainly, or also can be plants. Oyster reefs particularly were very important, and we've completely lost that habitat. But horse mussel reefs, which we still have remnants of, were much more widespread. Marl beds, which is a type of reef that's built by a type of species of seaweed, and seagrass meadows were much more widespread. And then what's really interesting about the loss of those habitats is that they are particularly important for spawning and nursery areas for fish and shellfish. So we'll look at that in a bit more detail, but huge areas of spawning nursery grounds that were once complex reef type structures have gone. And there were more fish, which again anecdotally we'd be aware of more diverse species, and also our fisheries and our economic use of the sea depended much more on fish than on shellfish, again, which we know anecdotally, but it was really interesting to kind of mine into how that's changed over the years. There were more larger species of fish. The fish were able to grow larger, and big species like the common skate, which is now become very, very it's a species of great conservation concern. They grew to large sizes, and they were subject of game fishing. And interestingly, some species that I'm really interested in myself, basking sharks, I'd hoped to find maybe more evidence of interesting patterns in their populations over the years, but particularly focusing on newspaper reports, it did seem that they weren't seen in particularly large numbers in the past, and the evidence was of them being quite sporadic, and perhaps the numbers that we saw maybe 15 years ago being probably the highest in recent history anyway, but that's an area that still like to do some more research on. So the reefs, the reefs are really important. So this picture just shows the way that oysters were dredged off the seabed, and they grew in huge banks. So if you pulled the dredge across them, you would very quickly catch a lot of them, and that's how whole beds could actually be eliminated very quickly by fisheries before they were well managed. And oyster habitat, you can imagine it being quite boring, lots of oysters all sort of stuck together, but actually they create a very diverse habitat for many other species and habitats. And so they lived for a long time, and then they really created a very important habitat for lots of other species. And so there's a lot of initiatives going on around the world now to restore this habitat. So this is just some little insights into the information that was found from maps and other sources. So this is a map from 1789, which shows an oyster bank from Laxey to about 2 miles from Ackles Head in 18 fathoms of water, about 2 miles broad and 1.5 miles from shore, so a very substantial feature on the seabed. And then in 1838, the Manx naturalist, one of the first real kind of marine biologists, Edward Forbes, he described an extensive oyster banks on the north and east coast were plentiful. The oysters on the north coast are extremely large and very coarse, but those on the east coast are esteemed and brought to market. And the bank is situated off the village of Laxey, so there's another perspective. And then this is the Tower of Refuge, zoomed in Douglas Bay, with an oyster reef flagged up right there as well. So lots of different sources of information. And then again, Ruth Thurston, who's recently brought together many researchers into oysters around Europe, and the existence of oyster reefs around the Isle of Man was flagged up in their research as well, and they described one that was that took 20 boats 7 years to dredge away. So you imagine how extensive that reef was to be, the boats were catching a lot. There was a high rate of sale of these oysters, and the example of one boat has got 30,000 oysters in a week. So it was they were very intensively fished at that stage. And then also through looking at obviously fisheries reports and also newspaper articles, there's the evidence of when management came in. So in 1894, the Sea Fisheries Act stopped trawling for fish, which would have been impacting on the reefs as well. And a summer closed season for oysters and a minimum landing size. And interestingly, a requirement to return the broken shell and gravel to the fishing ground, which on new research, when people are trying to restore oyster reefs, would have been a really important part of helping the reefs recover. So another habitat which is really, this is one we haven't lost completely. So merle beds or merle reefs are still an important part of the Manx marine environment, and they're protected within the inshore network of marine nature reserves. But it stands from various different sources that they were much more extensive. So there's the example from Mackenzie's old chart of 1775, showing extensive areas of what the fishermen were calling coral, and they recognised them then as spawning grounds. And then the same information from Manx Notes and Queries identifies it specifically as merle, which we know today, which is a seaweed that lays down a coral skeleton, a coral-like skeleton. So it's very important for biodiversity. Studies of it have shown over 600 species associated with the beds of this, because the little nodules provide lots of spaces for other animals to live. And they identified it all that time ago as an important spawning ground, and more recent research has shown evidence that it's really important for queen scallops, one of our main commercial species, for cod, and many other species. So its value was recognised, but it's only in very recent times that we've actually actively protected it. So that just shows a living merle bed. It's an example from Scotland, but you can see the juvenile fish using it, and it's very important for lots of juveniles. And an interesting link to perhaps the best known and most resource-rich species in Manx waters in terms of marine environmental history, herring. The herring, unlike most of the fish that we have around the Isle of Man, lays its eggs on the seabed, so it needs the right kind of seabed to lay its eggs on. And that could either be a particular size of gravel, which allows the oxygen to get to the eggs, or also merle. Merle is a really important habitat for herring to lay their eggs. And they spawn en masse in huge areas. And so there was evidence of these grounds in places where there's not been evidence in more recent decades or even centuries of the spawning of herring. So the changing, the impact of mobile fishing gears, dredging and trawling, and the removal of these habitats will have changed the way that herring spawned, and therefore the size of herring populations around the island. Again, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's very, if you asked anyone, they'd probably say there were more fish in the sea, in the past, but it's been really interesting to investigate what species were important commercially and what species people were catching, for sport, and other anecdotal information about the fish. So again, as a snapshot, in 1934, this is the breakdown of the Manx commercial fishery. So cod was the top species, accounting for a third of the fishery, followed by herring, and then crab and lobster, which is still very important, plaice, skate, and other fish species. And this is, I just must say that if you did this for all the vessels fishing in Manx waters in 1934, that would be, herring would be top of the table, but this is just the Manx vessels. So, and I just, these come out of directly out of the report, which just show that the methods that were being used, so that a lot of long lining was being used for things like cod, and an element of trawl, but also drift nets. It's interesting to look at the different gear and think about how they interacted with the ecosystem. So these photographs from the Manx National Heritage Archive, most people have seen these, and they're used a lot by the museum to show the abundance of species like cod, and the information that we look into really highlights its economic importance as well. And this is something that we've isn't caught commercially really at all in Manx waters. Again, particularly with herring, and there's lots of really good historical records on the herring fishery. The variation was well documented. So herring fishery had really good years and really bad years, and some of that will be natural variation, some of that will be to do with the exploitation, and the same for other species. But this is an account from 1648, where the fishermen were talking about poor years for fishing for cod. So the variation has been there for a long time, and looking at that alongside the kind of more recent science has been really interesting. And the common skate is a species that I've been really interested in because it's the focus of a lot of conservation efforts elsewhere, and it was one of the problems is that it was recorded, all skates and wasteways were recorded as a big general category, so it's getting the fisheries data from that is difficult, but it's been really interesting to kind of dig more into the size of these species, and some of the really useful information of the species come from angling records. As I said, the basking shark side of things, which I've been very interested in, and I trawled through a lot of records to try and find a bit more information about what exactly was happening before people were studying them in any scientific capacity. But there doesn't seem to be, I haven't yet found any evidence for huge numbers in the past, even up to the level of the numbers we saw, in the last 20 years. So there's, I think there's a lot more to do on that, but I think that there's been a natural variation in these numbers of where the basking sharks actually used resources over the decades. So it's something I'd like to find out more about. But there's some lovely accounts of people's individual encounters with basking sharks, which always seem to make the papers over a long period. Seabirds are a whole other area. There's a huge amount of really interesting information about how seabird populations have changed. But I particularly like this example from a journal that was quoted in an archaeological report about a visitor being fed a dish of cold parrots, which were thought to be puffin, and were corroborated by the bones of puffins that were found in the dig. So, going back to what this tells us about what we should be doing now about the marine environment. So what we've lost is these rich biogenic reefs and shellfish reefs. So this is a nice infographic from a rewilding project, just showing all the different animals and plants that are associated with a reef that's been built by, in this case, mussels, and just how important these structures are. So if you imagine, you would normally have maybe a quite featureless gravelly area, but the mussels or the oysters build up a really diverse reef, and they create a nursery ground for species that we need to eat. They create huge kind of focuses for biodiversity, and then that all links in. It's not just what's on the surface of the sea; it's burrowing animals underneath, and it's animals that are feeding on the shore and feeding in the pelagic environment as well. So they're really, really important habitats that we've lost huge areas of. So we've got various options for how we manage our seas, and a lot of it depends on what we do about climate change and how reducing emissions. And if we have lower emissions and we manage our oceans in a sensitive way, then we can have a really good sustainable future with more productive seas that can provide us with more sustainable food, and also additional benefits like becoming a solution, part of the solution for climate change, and things like blue carbon, which is locking away carbon in marine ecosystems. The alternative, where we don't make the right decisions, it's very dark, where we don't get the benefits from the sea that we need. The options for seafood and so on diminish, but also we're not getting those climate change benefits either. So the current challenges we have to a sustainable future are climate change. We've got rising sea temperatures and changes in ocean chemistry. Coastal and marine development can impact on the remnants of these habitats. Poor practices on land, other ways of losing habitats. We've still got challenges with over-exploitation and damaging fishing methods, which we've seen is how we lost a lot of these things in the first place. And also the poor decision-making about how not taking into account how vital nature is and how our marine environments, we need it as much as we need it to function well for our own well-being. One of the things that I've been reading about recently, which I think could really help, is climate-smart marine spatial planning, which is underpinning everything we do in the sea with good outcomes for marine ecosystems and for climate. And this, it is a real win-win solution, because we all benefit from curbing climate change and from having a more successfully functioning marine ecosystem. So I've got just a few kind of my vision of how to build a beautiful blue future based on that, looking into the past, what went wrong, what we've lost, how can we build a better future? So the first one is to really put nature at the heart of all our decisions. And it's something that we aspire to as a biosphere reserve, but isn't necessarily happening in practice. We need to manage our marine protected areas effectively. So we're protecting the remnants of these habitats and the remaining populations of species that we've seen decline, but we need to make sure we manage those as well as we can. There's a global target to effectively protect 30% of the world's oceans by 2030, and the Isle of Man has got about 11% protected. Well, it's more than that actually. So we're not up to 30% yet, so we've got that to aspire to. We need to protect salt marshes and floodplains and coastal habitats because they are doing so much to protect us. Prioritising nature, conservation and climate action. And as I said, making the right decision to the sea. So where there are choices between renewable energy and new fossil fuels, then the renewable energy has to, if that brings us benefits for climate, and we have to manage the impacts on the marine environment and to make it work for us as well. And I think one of the things that doing this work has really brought to me is the need to be ambitious for a better future. We could be real leaders on this. We have a really good science-based fisheries management regime. There are a good network of marine protected areas, and there's so much that could be done to develop this, and really looking at what we had in the past and then really aspiring to recreate that in a way that benefits everyone, I think is a real opportunity. Something I haven't had a chance to go into in detail is about the role of fishermen in the past of our marine conservation. In recent years, they've been very proactive in getting involved in science and being really hands-on in terms of the management of their sustainable management of their own fisheries. But if you look back through resources from the past, there were brilliant letters to the paper from fishermen who knew what needed to be done and were really frustrated it wasn't being done, and also the perspective of fishermen captured in reports, and so they're the people that are out in the sea, and I think they have a real role to play in the future. So that was reiterating a lot of what I've said really. I suppose building on that, we need to actively protect what we have and working towards ambitious restoration. So we have to, there are really good restoration projects going on around the world, and we have to consolidate, making sure we're protecting what we've got, but then we have, I think, being ambitious about restoring things like oyster reefs, things that really shape the marine environment, and living the biosphere designation. So the innovation, community involvement, and international world-leading research and action. We've got ingredients here, but we need more emphasis on the research and action based on the research, evidence-based action. And there are difficult decisions to make. There is really clear guidance from international agencies about no new fossil fuels, climate action really being embedded throughout everything we do, and that means difficult decisions, but they need to be made with that in mind. And I think something, again, that's come out of doing this historical look back through hundreds of years is the important role that so many different people have played. So, everyone can be involved in this. We all love the sea, and we can all play a part and enjoy restoring the seas to their former glory. So, one of the things to think about is really thinking about future generations. If you really think about what will happen in 10, 20, 30, 40 years' time, are we doing the right things to build that future? And I'm just going to finish on the words of one of my big marine heroines, Dr. Sylvia Earle. Even if you never had the chance to see or touch the ocean touches you every breath you take, every drop of water you drink, every bite you consume. Everyone, everywhere, is inextricably connected to and utterly dependent on the existence of the sea. And just the next steps of the report is that we're going to complete the preliminary report, and then this is the start of, I think, something I will be working on forever. There's so many things I want to keep investigating, so I will keep working on it in some capacity. But I really want to make sure that what I find can be fed back into policy decisions, so I'll be sending the reports and communicating it with the help of Corlett Bolton to as many people as possible. And I'm really excited about the opportunity as well to maybe work with others and to visualise these ecosystems, to really have actual pictures of this is what our oyster reefs look like. This is what, if you went diving 200 years ago, this is what our seabed would look like, and this is what we need to recreate. So, thank you very much, and thank you to Sally and Corlett Bolton for allowing me to do this fascinating research, and to Gell and UCM for the support to get it started. And then there are many people that have had a really valuable input. I'm very grateful for their support, so thank you very much.